They didn't ask. They just decided. That was always how it went in my family. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 31 years old, and I've spent the last 6 years building a quiet life for myself in Portland, Oregon. I work as a financial analyst for a logistics company, nothing glamorous, but it's stable. My apartment was my sanctuary, clean, calm, and mine. Every piece of it, from the lease to the chipped IKEA shelf I assembled with blistered palms, was earned without help, without handouts. But to my parents, quiet meant distant, and to them, distance meant cold. Not because I was unkind, but because I stopped cushioning the messes they didn't want to clean up. My younger brother Eli always got a soft landing. Always. He didn't make mistakes, he caused wreckage. And somehow that wreckage always landed at my feet. I was the fixer, the fallback, the one with a good heart and good credit. But I'd started pulling back, slowly, quietly, and that's when things started to shift. When I walked into dinner at my parents' house last Sunday, I knew without anyone saying a word that they had made another decision, one I wasn't going to like. But this time, I had a secret of my own. I stepped through the front door of my parents' house and instantly felt it, the tightness in the air, the overly sweet tone in my mother's voice, the way my father barely looked up from the television. Nothing was ever said directly in this family. It was all code, and I knew the code. When my mom greets me like she's hosting a tea party, and Dad pretends to be too absorbed in a rerun of some tired Western, it means a decision's been made without me, one I wouldn't have agreed to if given the choice. My younger brother Eli was already halfway through a drink, scrolling his phone like a teenager at Thanksgiving dinner. No greeting, no eye contact, just the sound of the ice clinking in his glass and the faint buzz of a notification. I sat down at the table, already exhausted before dinner even started. We made it through the salad barely when my mom set down her fork and folded her hands like she was about to deliver grace. But what came out of her mouth wasn't a prayer, it was an ambush. "Rachel," she said with that thin, sugary voice she always uses when she's about to ask too much. "Your brother's been going through a really hard time lately. We've decided he'll stay with you for a while. Just until he's back on his feet." Just like that. Like she was handing me a piece of pie. No discussion, no question, no awareness of the boundary she was steamrolling. I looked up, scanning the table. My dad avoided my eyes, already bracing for the argument he expected. Eli didn't even pause his scrolling. No thank you, no apology, not even a glance in my direction. Just entitlement. They were all waiting for me to push back, to say no, to once again become the difficult one who ruins the family's fragile harmony. But this time I didn't argue. I smiled. "Of course," I said lightly. "If it helps Eli get back on track, I don't see why not." The silence that followed was sharp and heavy. My mom blinked in surprise. My dad exhaled in relief. Eli leaned back in his chair, smugness spreading across his face like mold in the corners of a forgotten room. And that was the moment I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. Because what none of them knew, what none of them had bothered to ask, was that I hadn't lived in that apartment for weeks. The keys no longer belonged to me. The walls they were planning to invade were no longer mine to offer. I had let them talk, let them decide, let them assume. And now they were going to find out what it really meant to be left out of the loop. I took another sip of my wine, smiled politely, and let the rest of the dinner pass in silence. My mind wasn't there anymore. It was already moving toward what would happen next. Toward the moment they'd realized they were no longer welcome in a place they never truly saw as mine. The days that followed that dinner felt strangely calm. I didn't rush to explain anything. I didn't text, didn't warn, didn't soften the blow I knew was coming. For once, I let the silence speak for me. By Monday morning, The texts started rolling in. We'll bring Eli's mattress over Saturday. Your dad is boxing up his things Friday. He's really looking forward to having some space of his own. They weren't messages meant for me, not really. They were written for the version of Rachel they'd created, the dependable, predictable daughter who always made room, always made things work. That woman didn't exist anymore, but they hadn't noticed. Not yet. I ignored every message, letting each one stack on top of the last like unpaid bills. By Thursday, my mother was in full project mode. Let me know if I should bring cleaning supplies, she wrote. Eli says he'll do his own laundry this time. He's bringing his own dishes. That one made me laugh into my morning coffee. Eli hadn't washed a plate sober in years. But still, I said nothing. I let them plan, let them believe, let them walk blindly into their own assumption. Because this time, I wasn't going to play the villain for protecting my peace. I'd given my brother everything from car loans to attorney fees. I'd been their safety net, their bailout, their silent investor in a family business that only seemed to benefit everyone but me. And still, when I finally said no, they acted like I'd set fire to the house. I spent Saturday morning exactly the way I wanted to, walking slowly through a local craft market, coffee in hand, breathing in fresh air and quiet. I browsed handmade candles and knitted scarves with no intention of buying anything. Just being there felt like an act of rebellion. The sun was soft on my face, the kind of warmth that made you forget it was still technically spring. Around 10:30, my phone started to buzz. One call, then two, then three in a row. I didn't check them. I wandered further into the market, listened to someone play acoustic guitar by the food trucks, watched an older couple slow dance near a stall, selling vintage postcards. I was so far from my old life, and I didn't miss it at all. But the fourth call came, and something in me told me to answer. It was my mother, not her usual syrupy tone. This was brittle, tight-edged with confusion. "There's someone here," she snapped. "Some man. He says he lives in the condo now. He says you don't live here anymore." I let the silence stretch out, savoring the unfamiliar sound of her not knowing what came next. "You didn't tell us," she barked. "You never said a word." "No," I said calmly, "I didn't." I could hear the shuffling in the background, the scrambling, the disbelief, Eli probably cursing under his breath. And just like that, the plan they'd crafted so carefully began to unravel. For a long second, no one on the other end of the line said anything. I imagined them standing in front of that condo, my former condo bags, at their feet, Eli with his mattress rolled up like a promise, my father with that tight, disappointed look he wore whenever things didn't go exactly his way, and my mother, probably blinking in stunned silence, caught in the space between assumption and reality. Finally, she found her voice again, sharp now, angry. "What is this, Rachel?" she hissed. "What game are you playing?" I kept my tone even. "I sold the condo. Weeks ago, I moved out." "You what?" She spat, as if I just confessed to abandoning a child in a supermarket. "You moved and didn't tell us." "No one asked," I said. And that was the truth. No one had asked where I lived, how I was doing, if I needed anything. I was only contacted when something was needed from me. A ride, a check, a favor, never a conversation, never a connection. "So what now?" Eli's voice finally broke through in the background. "We're just supposed to figure it out." He didn't sound angry, just stunned, hollow. And for a moment, a brief, flickering moment, I almost softened. Almost. But I didn't. Because this wasn't just about this weekend, or a mattress, or a place to crash. It was about years. Years of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the invisible one. Years of being useful, never truly seen. I'd become a wallet with a voice, a credit score with a smile. I said you could stay there, I reminded him, but I never said where there was. I could hear them now moving quickly, probably rushing back to the car, trying to figure out what to do next. They'd made plans without me, and now they had to live inside the consequences. That silence between us, thick, raw, unfamiliar, wasn't just about the condo. It was about the shift. The moment I stopped playing the part they wrote for me. I hung up first, not abruptly, just decisively. I didn't owe them an ending. That night, I returned home to my new apartment, the one they didn't know existed. Smaller, yes. No city view, no fancy furniture, but peaceful. Mine. I made a cup of tea and stood at the window watching the city breathe beneath me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't proud. I was just done. But I knew them, knew my mother wouldn't let it go, knew she'd dig and pry and guilt her way into finding me. And when she did, when they stood on this doorstep, there would be no more pretending, just truth. And consequences. They showed up 3 days later. I heard the knock before I saw the shape of them through the peephole, 3 polite raps measured, and careful like they thought manners might grant them entry. I stood there for a moment just listening to my heartbeat and the hum of the fridge behind me. I didn't open the door right away. I wanted to feel what it was like to have the choice. For most of my life, I hadn't had that. Not really. Every call, every crisis, every guilt-laced favor, they were expectations disguised as love. When I finally opened the door, my mother was standing there with her purse clutched like a weapon. My father's arms folded, jaw locked. Eli looked smaller than I remembered, eyes darting around like he was searching for some version of me he used to manipulate. "Do you know what people will think of you?" my mother hissed before I could speak. "Do you know what they'll say?" "Yes," I said quietly. "They'll say I finally stopped opening my door." She blinked. Not because she didn't understand, but because she didn't expect me to mean it. "You used to be kind," she said, her voice dropping into something thinner, more brittle. "You used to care when I was in pain." I didn't flinch. She was looking for the old Rachel, the one who apologized just for existing, the one who filled silence with explanations, smoothed over conflict with compromise. That woman wasn't home anymore. The silence that followed her words wasn't empty. It was loaded. Every unpaid debt of emotion, every memory of me stepping up while they sat down, every sacrifice they'd swallowed, like it was owed. My father stepped forward, voice sharp. "This is your family. You don't just turn your back on blood." But I'd heard that line before, dressed up in 1,000 variations, always ending with me giving more than I had. I looked at all 3 of them and saw what I'd never allowed myself to fully admit. They weren't here for connection. They were here for control. They weren't confused by my silence. They were insulted by it, because I was supposed to be available. Always. I opened my mouth to answer, but I didn't have to. A flash of red and blue lights flickered across the walls of the hallway. A patrol car had pulled up out front. I'd called ahead not out of fear, but preparation. The officer stepped inside the building, calm, composed. "Evening," she said, voice steady. "We got a report of potential trespassing." My parents turned to me, stunned. "This is a family matter," my dad said. The officer's gaze didn't shift. "This is her home," she replied. "And without her permission, you're not allowed to be here." Eli's face flushed deep red, his jaw tightening. "You're going to regret this," he muttered. I looked at him not with anger, but with finality. I've regretted almost everything until now. That night, after the officer escorted them out of the building, I stood alone in the hallway for a few seconds longer than I needed to, just listening, waiting to feel something. Relief, sadness, guilt. But nothing came, not anger, not joy, just stillness, a strange, unfamiliar kind of peace. When I finally closed the door, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't second-guess myself. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat in the silence like it was a friend I hadn't seen in years. It didn't press or demand or twist my stomach in knots. It just sat with me. That was the difference. The silence in their presence always felt like walking on cracked ice. This was solid. By morning, I had 12 missed calls, 5 from my mother, 2 from my father, the rest from unknown numbers I could guess belonged to cousins, family friends, or that one aunt who only reaches out when there's drama to stir. The voicemails followed the usual pattern: shock, confusion, moral outrage, a plea for family unity. Then came the texts. Why would you do this to your own brother? Your mother's heartbroken. Eli is sleeping in his car. Was that your goal? I didn't respond. I wasn't going to be pulled back in by orchestrated shame. I scrolled quietly through the messages, letting them roll over me like wind on a windshield, seen but no longer able to touch me. Then I saw it. A Facebook post from my mother. Public. 3 long paragraphs filled with heartbreak emojis and a photo of Eli as a baby in his Halloween costume looking helpless and sweet. The caption read, "We raised both our children to love each other, but one of them has forgotten. Rachel has turned her back on us during our time of need. We're devastated." I stared at it. Not because it hurt, though, for a split second it tried to, but because I knew what would follow. And I was right. The comments poured in like gasoline. People I hadn't spoken to since high school suddenly had opinions about my soul, so cold. I always knew she was self-centered. How could she do that to her own family? It wasn't new. It was just louder. They'd done this before, just not on a screen. Whisper campaigns in living rooms, little digs at reunions, quiet rewrites of every story I never had the energy to correct. But this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. I pulled open a folder on my laptop, one I'd been building for years, not for revenge, but for clarity. Screenshots, wire transfers, copies of car loan agreements, receipts, every silent bailout I'd ever made, every just this once they claimed to forget. I wasn't going to argue. I was just going to tell the truth. And this time I'd let them read it out loud. I didn't rush. I didn't write out a caption or try to craft the perfect statement. I didn't owe the internet an explanation or a narrative. I just started uploading, one image at a time. A screenshot of the $3,000 I wired to my parents when they said they were about to lose the house. The payment receipt from the attorney who got Eli's DUI reduced. The loan agreement, where my name sat beside his on the paperwork for a car he drove for 6 months before it got repossessed. I posted the invoice for the damages he left behind in an apartment I'd co-signed for the late notices that had shown up in my mailbox, not his. I didn't add commentary. I didn't need to. The facts were louder than any story my mother could spin. At the end, I posted one final screenshot, an old message from Eli sent at 2:13 a.m. on a night when I'd told him I couldn't help anymore. "You're a boring robot, Rachel. You think being responsible makes you better than everyone else. It doesn't. It just makes you alone." I stared at that line for a while. He probably didn't even remember sending it. But I had. I remembered every word, every time they'd said, I didn't feel enough, didn't try enough, wasn't kind enough just because I'd drawn a line. I ended the post with a single sentence: I didn't abandon my family. I just stopped volunteering for emotional debt. Then I turned off my phone, not out of fear, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I didn't need to read the comments to know what they would say. Some would praise me, some would attack, some would try to turn it into a morality play, but none of it mattered, not anymore, because for the first time, I wasn't trying to be the good daughter or the peacemaker. I wasn't trying to fix anyone's image of me. I had said no, and I had meant it. That night I made chamomile tea, not because I needed help sleeping, but because I liked the warmth of the mug in my hands. I liked the steam rising into the air, soft and slow. I curled up on the couch, no TV, no music, just the sound of the refrigerator humming and the distant rhythm of the city below. I hadn't felt that kind of quiet in years, not silence full of tension or unspoken resentment, just peace, stillness, mine. The phone buzzed once on the counter. Then again, I didn't check it. I already knew the rhythm, shock, anger, guilt, pleading. It had a script, and I'd memorized every line. But this time I wasn't performing. I wasn't part of their play. I was writing my own ending. And somewhere beyond the buzzing, beyond the noise, I realized this wasn't just a break. It was the beginning of something entirely new. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds and fell across the hardwood floor in soft, golden stripes. I sat up slowly, blinking away the kind of sleep that doesn't come from exhaustion, but from relief. For the first time in years, I hadn't been woken up by the weight of someone else's needs. No anxiety churning in my chest, no pit in my stomach anticipating a crisis. Just morning, just breath, just me. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, made another cup of tea, and stood at the window watching as the city stretched itself awake. Across the street, a man in a faded hoodie walked a golden retriever. A woman in a robe swept her porch. A delivery guy nodded at me from his bike. Nothing urgent, nothing pressing, just life happening quietly. My phone still face down on the counter, lit up with more missed calls. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I already knew what was waiting. My mother's voice, laced with betrayal, Eli's bitterness, disguised as confusion, cousins offering their unsolicited advice, extended family caught between concern and gossip. It was all noise. I'd lived in that noise for too long, and now I had volume control. I moved through the apartment, slowly turning off the hallway light I'd left on overnight, folding the blanket from the couch, placing the mug in the sink with care. There were no photos on the walls, no trophies or framed memories curated to prove I'd been a good daughter. Just space, just peace, and still a small ache stirred somewhere beneath the calm. Not regret, not guilt, just the quiet echo of loss. The kind you feel when you finally close a door that's been swinging open and shut for years. It wasn't about punishment. It never was. It was about choosing not to disappear anymore. Because every yes I gave them chipped away at something inside me time, trust, truth. They didn't see it. Or maybe they chose not to. Either way, I wasn't their foundation anymore. I wasn't the scaffolding for everyone else's collapse. And yet, despite all the resolve, I felt a sting I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was mourning. Not for them, but for the version of me that kept trying to earn their love like it was a prize handed out at the end of a performance. That version of me was gone now. And what came next would be quieter, smaller, but more honest. I stepped onto the balcony and let the wind move around me. The air was crisp clean, a little cold, but not biting. Just enough to remind me I was still here, still choosing, still standing. And as I stood there watching the world move on, I knew I hadn't closed the door on my family. I had simply closed it to the version of them that refused to see me. That night, I turned off the lights one by one, letting the darkness settle around me like a soft blanket. The apartment, though modest, felt sacred every quiet corner, a reminder that healing doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up in the stillness, in the decision not to answer, not to explain. I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't angry. I was simply rooted, grounded in a truth I'd spent years avoiding. You don't owe anyone your peace, especially those who only love you when you're useful. Betrayal doesn't always come with knives. It often arrives wearing the mask of loyalty, wrapped in guilt and soft voices. But real loyalty doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't demand you vanish in order to keep the peace. And in reclaiming my space, my voice, I didn't just walk away from a toxic dynamic. I walked toward a life I get to define. The kind of life where love is mutual, not managed. Where quiet is a gift, not a punishment. The lesson you can set boundaries without setting fire. You can protect your soul without proving you're suffering. If this story echoes something in your own life, drop a comment. Tell me your version. And if you're ready to stop surviving and start choosing, hit subscribe. Let's heal out loud together.